everyone. My name is Frida Faisal, and I'm a New York City, Brooklyn-based Jewish YouTuber with an interest in Jewish life, religion, subcultures, and human stories. Today, I'm speaking with Rabbi Dovid Bashevkin, one of the most prominent Jewish podcasters and intellectual voices in the modern Orthodox community, and the host of the 1840 podcast. Rabbi Bashevkin, or Dovid, is known for asking hard questions about faith, doubt, Israel, and communal life, but he asks them from within Orthodoxy as someone deeply embedded in the world he's examining. I often ask similar questions from the outside. His audience tends to be inside the community, I think. Mine often stands at the margin or outside. There's a lot of overlap and also meaningful difference. I'm interested in learning about him, and I'm especially interested in what he's seeing and experiencing right now, the challenges, the tensions, the insights of the moment from the very particular bird's eye view he occupies within the Jewish world. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Before we begin, I want to thank those of you who are channel members and help make this work possible. I publish videos early for channel members, but all my videos later get published to everyone. I appreciate all of you members, subscribers, viewers, and commenters for helping make this work possible. Thank you. And thank you, Dovid, so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Frida. This is such a treat.
You know, when I prepared for this interview, I think you're the only Orthodox podcast that had me on.
Which is bizarre to me. I mean, I've been following your work for some time. I think liminal personalities, people who have lived with multiple identities embedded in multiple communities, have an insight into each community that they have a pinky toe in, or a little bit of a part of themselves in. And I just find that the very fact, and we spoke about this when I interviewed you, like the work that you do, I think you're the one who you use the term cultural translation, is so important now. And we have this gift called the internet, which allows us to communicate and shed windows and collapse geographic distances. So to be sharing stories with the Jewish world, with the global world, not just the Jewish world, with the non-Jewish world, and giving them an insight of what authentic Jewish life is about, I think it's extraordinarily holy work. I was so excited when you came onto mine. I mean, you're really, really a role model in this world of helping present an authentic view of internal religious life, like insider religious life. Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, Dovid. And also, I feel like it reflects your particular unique role as a Jewish voice that you were willing to platform me. You do, I'm sure, understand why other places would be uncomfortable platforming me. So I wonder if you can just describe to me and to the people who watch my videos what your work is about and where it comes from. Is that a very difficult ask?
No, it's great. It's a question that I constantly am asking myself, because the only way to keep stamina of producing content online, even the word content makes me a little bit exhausted and tired. The only way to do this is to be mission oriented, is to really have a purpose beyond clicks, of you're really trying to share something unique. And we started 1840, which is a very strange name for a podcast. It would have been much easier to just do, I don't know, D-Bash or Dovid Bashevkin or whatever it is.
Why 1840?
Yeah, why 1840? And that's really what our mission was. 1840 has significance in both the particular Jewish world as well as the broader world. We'll start with in the broader world. 1840 is really a turning point culturally, where we see industrialization, globalization, celebrity culture. The individuation of the modern world is really starting to emerge beginning in 1840. And in the Jewish world, this took on a life of its own, because in the Zohar, which is one of the most famous central canonized mystical texts that Jews study, the 1840 corresponds to the sixth millennia, the 6th century of the 6th millennia. That is 1840 on the Jewish calendar, right? In the Jewish year, we're not in the year 2026. We have our own count, our own calendar. And on the Jewish calendar, 1840 is the 6th century of the 6th millennia, which the Zohar says there's going to be a bottom-up rising of a thirst for knowledge, a thirst for a personalized religious engagement where it's not so institutional, it's much more personal, it's much more accessible. And the world that I was seeing around me when I started in 2020, it felt in many ways like we were repeating this 1840 moment that there, COVID was happening then. So I remembered this feeling of like me and the Tonight Show have basically been reduced to the same quality of technology and broadcasting. Like we all have our own talk shows now. We all have this ability to formulate and articulate what is our approach to life. How do we see others? How do we bring others in conversation, share our values? And what 1840 to me was trying to do was discuss issues in an honest and authentic way related to Jewish life. That was really the main thing. And as we started developing more and more, I think my articulation of what we were trying to accomplish became more and more precise. Where the way I describe it now is what we're really trying to be is like a base medrash, a study hall. That is the Hebrew term, the Yiddish term for a house of study where people normally sit in front of texts, in front of Talmuds, and to be a study hall not for text, but for Jewish life itself, to be a base medrash for the Jewish people, for where Jews can learn about one another's struggles in a very real way, in an authentic way. What are you grappling with? Because I believe, and I believe this to my core, that the same way that you develop an understanding of Judaism through classical texts, through the Bible, through codes, through all of these things, there is an equal amount to learn about Jewish life and divinity by just talking to other Jews. And that's really what it's become, to really try to understand and develop a vision that can, even in potential, reach the entirety of the Jewish people, a vision of Yiddishkeit, a vision of Jewish life that can reach beyond those who have had the gift of a Jewish education and articulate a vision of what Jewish life can and should be for the broader world.
Is 1840 your biggest project right now?
Yeah, it occupies a great deal of my time, the struggles of it. Yeah. I also teach in Yeshiva University. I'm a Rebbe. I'm an educator. At my core, I'm an educator. I started, writing. I used to write a humor column for Mishpacha magazine, which is one of the kind of the insider Jewish weeklies, probably the most popular, high quality magazine that comes out every week. I've written a few books. I was interested in academia a little bit, but really the bulk of my time is split between teaching in Yeshiva University and really building the groundwork of 1840, which has multiple spokes. We have a podcast. We do something called I Read This Over Shabbos, where we encourage Shabbos reading. People post. And we have a lot about book culture to try to remind people where to find ideas that are richly presented, not just 30-second reels, which I've become as existential. And I like advertising the beauty of Shabbos to our listeners.
Yeah, I think you first came on my radar through the I Read This Over Shabbos Twitter situation, which is really fun, where people share what they had spent Shabbos reading.
Yes.
I have to say, I find Shabbos really, really difficult. I'm not Shomer Shabbos myself, which I feel uncomfortable saying, and I hope it's not offensive, but that's the truth. And I've often asked myself, how can I trick myself into keeping Shabbos? Because I really would like to. I feel like it's something that would be nice to do. And especially it would help me participate with things that I want to, like my mother was sick and it was like I wasn't able to take on any help on Shabbos because I felt like I just can't do all of these Shabbos things. But anyway, I keep telling myself, if I do Shabbos, I'll read books. And that's like a sell.
I think that's one of our distinctions, is that you shine a window. You kind of lived and set up camp from outside of your community, your childhood community. I still live very much within the community. We're both creating windows, but the question is, I feel like I'm inside the community creating a window, both for insiders and outsiders to see one another. And you're on the outside helping outsiders kind of look into insiders. And in very much, you're also helping insiders see the outside world, how they are seen and how they're understood. My thing with Shabbos, the struggle with I struggle with Shabbos also, particularly in my 20s. It's a team sport. It's the only commandment in the Torah that is prefaced with the verb in Hebrew vayakel, which means to gather. It's the same term meaning kehila, which is community. It is really hard. It's a litmus test of one's communal alignment. Shabbos can be very difficult and challenging if you don't have a community to practice it with, if you don't feel embedded within community. I think so. In my 20s, when I was single and lost, I struggled a great deal with Shabbos. Shabbos was not the joy that it has become for me now. And I haven't forgotten that period, which is why I as much as I love talking about Shabbos, it comes from an appreciation both of its beauty, but also of its struggles. Like I grew up with Shabbos. I grew up with a stressed out father who would, zoom in right before Shabbos beginning, and you couldn't talk to him. And it was really like frightening as a kid. Those moments before it was so hectic, so chaotic. I understand why for many people it becomes a struggle. And, that's something that this is where I feel there's work internally as a community that we need to do to help people who are either on the margins, right in between, or even all the way outside to kind of even see a spot or a future for themselves within the lived Jewish community.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, because I interviewed Danielle Jacobs, who calls herself from, or she's Shomer Shabbos, and she's divorced. Wonderful, wonderful person. I don't know if you know Yechiel Jacobs, the comedian.
Sure.
Okay,
He's
so
great.
He's very
Sebastian
funny.
Maniscalco imitation. That's spot on. It's fantastic.
Oh, really? I only know his imitation of oh God, the lemur. You know the lemur from Madagascar?
He's
It's
the
very
best.
funny.
We love
Yeah,
Yechiel. He's bringing joy to
yeah.
the world.
Yeah, exactly. So his mom is also very talented, singer, dancer, actress, everything. And I interviewed her, and her story was very moving. And she talked about how difficult it is she finds to keep Shabbos as someone who keeps Shabbos but is not married. And I got a lot of responses from Orthodox people who are like, how can I reach her? I want to invite her for Shabbos, which I don't think is the point. I don't think she's looking for invites. She's looking for a structural
Correct.
solution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think in many ways, Shabbos is a prototypical from the 1840 lens, is we're able to discuss both its beauty, I think its urgency in this moment in time with the over encroachment of technology. People feel the urgency of Shabbos more than ever, but they also feel as it becomes more urgent, in many ways it becomes more difficult. They go hand in hand. It's very interesting. Shabbos in the 1980s and the 1970s felt very, very different. There was much less you had to turn off. There's much less you had to disconnect from. So the transition was probably more doable. Now it's so much more obvious to me the sense of Shabbos and how difficult it is to create a Shabbos environment, but also how urgent I think it is for society to figure out. We need to develop a relationship for Shabbos, certainly starting within the Jewish community, just to figure it out. How do we create a doorway? Some of the language that we use on 1840 is when you go into any room, you always see neon exit signs, exit, exit, exit. And sometimes when you grow up within the community, that's all you see religiously. You see a lot of exit signs. For me, my first memory is on the line in the supermarket. That's always where they keep the non-kosher gum, which most people know as gum, regular gum, like the double bubble. I forgot what they're called, like the Wrigley's, juicy fruit. And I remember as a young kid, my mother would tell me, none of this is kosher. You can't buy any of it. And I remember as a kid, I would lift it up to my nose. You could smell it through the packaging. I go, oh, if only. And it could be a neon exit sign for people. You don't have to live with this. And to me, this moment is really about articulating a vision of Judaism that is self-justifying, where the experience itself is the motivation. Why do I keep Shabbos? So I can have Shabbos. That's why I keep it. Meaning my connection to my personal Judaism, the motivation is not theological or even philosophical as much as is I need the experience of Yiddishkeit in my life. I need Judaism in my life. The only way to have it is to kind of build it, and there are rules and there's ways that you do it. But I think what people need now, and this is a problem that began with the Enlightenment, when it used to, Judaism, all religion was coerced. It was something that you had to do, and there was real, your taxation, your professional life, everything hinged on how you were registered. And as we go deeper into modernity, we have to learn other language and other methodology for how to motivate people's religious affiliation. And in my mind, I think the ultimate motivation is the experience itself. And I think that's where we're actually headed as a community, where the reason why people want to do it is because it is so, it's to have the experience, it's to have the life itself is the reward, so to speak.
It's interesting because you're not giving a theological reason for or justification. You want to be outside, almost like it's not, you're not saying you're doing it for God. You're not saying you're doing it because you have to.
I am, but once we start using language of God, I feel like it gets so hyper individualistic of what that means. A lot of people, when they invoke God, they're really thinking about their 10th grade teacher yelling at them and telling them what God wants from you. I think God is something that is so deeply personal. I actually don't even feel comfortable like articulating and talking about that. It's deeply godly. It's divine. I mean, what I'm after is I want to sanctify my existence. I want to sanctify life itself. That's what I'm looking for. Life is so ephemeral. It is so confusing. It is so hard to find your way and build a meaningful life. To me, my Yiddishkeit is the vehicle with which I sanctify my existence, my time on this earth, my own consciousness.
It's interesting. You mentioned the gum story, which I find really interesting because I have spoken extensively about my obsession with gum that was kosher. We weren't allowed to eat any gum. In Kiryas Joel, where I grew up, they sold the gum under the counter, like you might sell cigarettes,
contraband,
drugs,
exactly.
Contraband. And if you came from a more frum family, the ladies at the grocery store knew that you weren't allowed the contraband. So you couldn't just buy it. You couldn't say, oh, I'm going to get a bubble gum. You just couldn't get it. So of course I resonate with holding it up because I have this very almost traumatic memory of going to a wedding in Williamsburg, slipping out of the wedding, buying a box of gum, which I was going to sell in school, and falling asleep in the car home and forgetting it. And I was so scared of that incident that gum now looms very large in my personal life journey.
That's really, really interesting. I absolutely love that. I love that your plan was to sell it on the black market, which is that is deeply Jewish. I mean, every school has their black market contraband, whether it was basketball cards or whatever it was that they're chasing. I mean, we had a whole economy. Every school has its own economy of underground contraband. So that, better gum than other things that are sold illegally in school. So that's very good.
That's true. They say you put one gate and another in order to protect you from worse things. And to some degree, it does work.
It starts with gum.
It starts with gum. Or that way, yeah. I don't know if you're comfortable answering this question, but it's something that I want to bring up, and we can not deal with it however you feel comfortable. But, I have a lot of what you say resonates with me about seeking, making meaning, and exploring that which is why do we do things? What makes you feel you ended up finding a place and meaning in Yiddishkeit, in Orthodox Judaism, whereas I couldn't?
It's a really, really great question, and one I think about a lot. First and foremost, I mean, we were both raised in an Orthodox community, and both of us had periods in our life where we questioned whether or not we had a future in this community. I had my questioning for really most of my 20s. I was thinking about leaving. That's not a secret. I've spoken about that. I was carrying a lot of pain. I was in the dating world. I'm sure it still remains, can be very isolating. There was something about the process of dating that felt like the eyes of the community were constantly evaluating you. You were constantly being judged and rejudged. And I so desperately just wanted to be loved without complication. I so desperately, I think it's the most internal human need of just learning how to find that unchosen familial love. And I think it's specifically love that is unchosen, love that cannot be lost, which is a unique familial love. And I think when people grow up in religious communities, it's very hard because the unchosen love of parents and what you want from siblings and communities is always kind of filtered through language of earning the love, of being a mensch, of following halacha, of doing the right thing. And that makes you worthy of love, which is not, this is not the real Jewish approach. The Jewish approach, Jewish identity is not contingent on any specific behavior. We believe in commandedness, but if somebody, you know as well as anyone that there's nobody in Kiryas Joel who would question whether or not you are Jewish just because you are not currently Shomer Shabbos. They know that your Jewish identity retains and remains even if you are not performing. I think for a lot of people, and my guess, and I'm speculating now, you asked the question, so I feel comfortable, and correct me, it's so sensitive to speculate about other people's religious journeys. But I suspect that for a lot of people, the contingent love of religious community, of religious expectations, if it is too prominent and you've had certain experiences, it can drown out your ability to access the unchosen familial love, which is actually what Jewish identity is based upon. And I think some people go through so much, a traumatic break in with familial issues, of feeling deeply misaligned communally, that they can no longer kind of access their inner and irrevocable goodness and being deserving of love and being a recipient of love, where they say, and sometimes rightfully so, the only way I can find this is by leaving. And we have a concept called a chosen family. I think that's a contradiction in terms, meaning family inherently is unchosen.
I see.
It's unchosen love. A mother and a father begin loving their child before they make the honor roll, before the first report card. It's a certain familial connection that grounds you in this world. Our deepest experiences and sense of identity is forged through the crucible of how we relate to our unchosen identity. So I think for many, especially if you grow up in a community with very high religious expectations, which exist throughout the Orthodox world, but it's, I think, even higher and even more tightly governed in a Hasidic community, it works for many if they're able to kind of find their grounding and their stability within the home and within the community, and they bend the rules where necessary. Or maybe, even when they mess up, they know that they always have a place here. But when religious expectations kind of obscure one's ability to have a sense of groundedness in their own life, where they always feel like, if I don't do this correctly, people are not going to love me. I'm not going to be worthy of love. I'm not going to be deserving of love. I find that is the catalyst that a lot of people end up leaving permanently. I look at myself as somebody who I don't know that I would call it like almost a double life. Like, I really was not in my 20s. I wasn't doing a lot. It was very hard for me to go to synagogue. It was very hard for me to pray. What it really took was being able to build a family of my own and kind of bring that back into my childhood family, that I almost reacquainted myself with my unchosen identity as a Jew, began to feel more comfortable in my own skin, realizing, and having a podcast does not help with this at all. It's the worst profession to go into if this is something you've grappled with. But realizing that I am inherently worthy and deserving of love is not. No, I'm being honest.
Of course you're deserving of love. I'm laughing about the podcast part, not about the love.
The podcasting makes it impossible because we're constantly evaluating our popularity, our relevance, what we go out to. It's not the point of my work is to be the most popular. It certainly helps, but modern day society, and I think it's something very deeply American, which is that we have to earn our place in existence. If you don't, what do we call somebody? We literally call people a failure. I mean, that's a very American United States. There's this book that I love and I've quoted many times called Born Losers, A History of Failure in America. It has nothing to do with Judaism in particular, but I think it's something that we grapple with in our community, of feeling like a failure. That in order for me to earn and feel like I have a grounded place in existence, I need to do certain things. And if I don't do them, I am now undeserving. And I think the undeservingness that people feel, the unworthiness that people feel, which is a product of having any expectations, meaning this isn't totally unique to the Jewish world. I think it's exacerbated. We have an ambitious community. We have a vulnerable community. But when our expectations crowd out or obscure our ability to feel a sense of homeness in our own existence and life, that is where kind of religious commitment begins to collapse. And I suspect, and I've seen this very frequently, if you pull away all of the threads, it kind of comes back to someone's relationship with their unchosen identity very often. Because as I've mentioned many times, the ultimate unchosen identity is not being a Jew, it's being alive. It's our existence itself, meaning nobody chooses to be born. We wake up in our own existence, in our own skin. Who put me here? Like, how'd I get here? And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to figure out, how do we build meaning with this phenomenon called existence, called consciousness?
That's interesting.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, I think the way I understand at least my Judaism, it's the response to that. It is the response to how to sanctify unchosen identity, how to sanctify existence itself.
Very interesting. Essentially, I'm hearing you say it's a lot about community, or it boils down to community. Can you fit into the community or not? Am I right?
I think.
Am I misphrasing?
No, I think finding community is central to finding self. I don't think you can find and discover yourself by yourself. It doesn't work that way. Meaning, who's looking, who's going to be found. I think people try to do that. I think that is a very modern
trendy thing.
Yeah, very trendy, very American, to become so self-absorbed, to basically find the answer through my own self, through my own individuality, my own uniqueness, my own amazingness. I think very often people who try to do that get trapped in the rat race of just trying to distinguish themselves. They'll build very tall towers. They'll try to become famous. They'll try to break through all of the noise, because if I see myself in the newspaper, if I see myself, on television or in a movie, the attraction of fame is, I think, the ultimate it's the ultimate Band-Aid to the problem of existence. I genuinely feel, I don't know if you ever met a celebrity.
I don't think so.
So I had one, I wrote about this. I went to the 92nd Street Y when Stephen Colbert and Alex Edelman were in conversation. I know Alex personally. He's now become maybe a celebrity in his own right, but Colbert for me was like, wow. Now, this took place on a Jewish fast day. This is a very Jewish story. It took place on a Jewish fast day. If you want to know, it was a Shivasar B'Tammuz. So it was the summertime. It's a fast day. And I was embarrassed because I wouldn't normally go, to a 92nd Street Y conversation on a Jewish fast day. Alex had actually reached out personally. I said, I'm going to go. But right after this is over, I'm going to need to break my fast. So I texted Alex as a joke. I said, just make sure you have, some sponge cake and orange juice, which is like the classical break fast, that they'll put outside of synagogue when you're finished. And I remember they began the show and Stephen Colbert turned to the entire crowd. There were a few hundred people there. Is Dovid Bashevkin here? And I heard this is the weirdest thing. I think about this constantly. Hearing my name spoken by a celebrity made me feel more alive. I exist more. Why? I'm just telling you, I felt it. I felt it in my bones.
It makes sense.
Yeah, you have a celebrity friend. I think that's what people are grappling with. They're trying to figure out, they're trying to build a foundation where they feel comfortable in their own existence.
What happened? I'm sorry, but now I'm distracted by the story.
What happened at the end? They had to run out. The 92nd Street Y, thank God, is not that far, and I'm a great faster, so I just had a little water bottle in my pocket, and that was more than enough. I davened the Ma'ariv in a shul nearby, and then I broke the fast after it was done. So
you stretched your fast.
Yes, I stretched it a little bit.
For the celebrity, or it was for your friend?
It was for my friend. I was really, Alex was just getting started, and I was very excited. I knew, Stephen was somebody who I've always followed comedy. Comedy is also in that liminal cultural translation space where you are explaining an insider world, insider frustrations to outsiders, which I think is very, very holy and beautiful. So yeah, I managed through that fasting experience.
I thought you were going to say Colbert had a tray of orange
That's what I was hoping for. I was hoping for a
what
tray.
Happened there?
I asked him after. I actually sat across from his wife, Evie, because I was right in the front over there. But no, they did not come with actual sponge cake and orange juice, and I registered my frustration to both Stephen and Alex Edelman.
You're owed sponge cake and orange juice. That's a great story. I find it interesting when you talk about community and the existence of self. I happen to not be so interested in issues of God. People seem to be able to talk about God forever and seem to like talking about God. I am much more interested in Bein Udam Lechvaidoi instead of Bein Udam Lemukim, if you will, like between man and man, then between man and God. My interest is always in how we interact as people. It's a great fascination of mine. And when it comes to how we fit into communities and find our places, I think what's interesting about you is your own place in Jewish community, which at the interview I mentioned, you brought me on your podcast. You're Orthodox, you're respected in the Orthodox community. Is it fair to say sometimes? I mean, going to 92nd Street Y on a fast, maybe.
I wasn't the only rabbi in the crowd. I'll tell you that much. I'm not gonna throw anybody else under the bus, but there were others there.
No judgment from me. You're still in whatever community. I want to hear from you what tensions you exist with in your particular place. Are you pushing? Are you feeling very at home there? And what are you seeing in that space?
I think during my 20s, when I really pulled away from the Jewish community, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think God is so abstract. That's why, it's so deeply personal. I really measure one's Jewish experience and what Yiddishkeit and Judaism is by how it's practiced, by how people treat each other. What's the experience of somebody walking in to a Jewish community? I've said many times, if you want to know how religious somebody is, you don't ask their rabbi. You certainly don't, ask God to send you down a ranking. You ask their family members. I mean, that's the ultimate indication of one's religiosity, are the people closest to them. It's not the length of one's beard or how important or how rabbinic that they look. The ultimate litmus test of one's religious life and religious commitments is how they treat others. And that's where godliness, I think, really, really emerges. I think there's a tremendous amount of tension. I'm not sure precisely. Are you asking for the tension in the community that I live, or kind of like what I'm
Yeah.
seeing?
As a podcaster, as an Orthodox Jewish podcaster, what pressures are you getting and how are you handling it?
That's a very different question. And I would like to address that because I think it's a really, really important one. I think both of us, it's very hard when you are trying to serve as a primary part of your demographic, other Jews, because we're a very,
Opinionated.
we're very opinionated and critical people. And I think we are at a very strange inflection point that I'm not even sure people appreciate where we are in American Jewish history. I appreciate it because all of my grandparents are American born. My oldest grandparent was born in 1915. My Zaidi served in World War II. He was based in Caserta, Italy, doing intelligence. And I've really seen, just from our extended family, a snapshot of the entirety of the American Jewish experience. I mean, my namesake, Dovid Bashevkin, had 9 children. So we have a lot of cousins, and they're just to see what happens, not over 1,000 years, but what happens over 1 generation, 2 generations, what has happened in my lifetime. And I think in many ways, Jews repeat a very similar pattern. It's a pattern that Rav Meir Simcha of Dvinsk has a very haunting message about what he sees as the cycles of Jewish life. And essentially what he says is Jews come to a new land. When they come to a new land, they immediately try to assimilate in order to kind of gain favor within that space. Then after they try to assimilate and it doesn't work out, what happens next? The next generation is kind of frustrated by that assimilation, and they want to know, look, we weren't even accepted all that much. We didn't really make that many inroads. At the very least, we should try to return back to the original vision. So the second generation becomes more devout, becomes more religious. The third generation, he says, they were raised with this kind of devoutness. They were raised with the system already in place. They were raised with the institutions, with the vision, with the model. And it's the third that generation that starts to question all over again, what's our job now? How do we continue this? How do we build from here? What is our role in this unfolding story? And I think while Rav Meir Simcha of Dvinsk was talking about European Jewry, this is very true of American Jewry. Of my 4 grandparents, only one of them received a very basic Jewish education. My grandfather, who actually became an out-of-town rabbi in Portland, he married my grandmother, could not read Hebrew, benched in English, would pray in English, wasn't able to read Hebrew. My father's parents grew up, they could speak Yiddish, they actually could read Hebrew, but they were what it meant to be Jewish in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Not much. I mean, my Zaidi worked on Shabbos really until he retired. They kept the basic holidays they had. They were classical American Jews. And it was my father who kind of broke off and said, I want to get a richer and more robust Jewish education. I don't want to fully assimilate. I want to have a real access and foundation for my own Jewish life. He was the one who insisted, to the outright protests of my Bubby and Zaidi, say, I want to go to Yeshiva University. My grandparents were horrified. You want to be a rabbi? I thought you were going to be a doctor. I thought you were going to be an oncologist, which he ended up becoming. But no, he went out, and then my father gave his children, all 5 of us, I'm one of 5, we got to start, and we got the full, we went to a Jewish elementary school, a Jewish high school, we all spent 2 gap years in Israel, me and all my siblings, and thank God we kind of built this model of Jewish life in America. I think the question now, that the tension that I think people very much see coming, is, what about the next generation? Now, what about our children? Our children are being raised in a world where there are more institutions of Jewish education than there ever been before. The momentum, the culture in American Jewry has become so much more traditional. There's been an October 7th awakening within the non-Orthodox world that has made it very in vogue to kind of seek out tradition. And now we have kids that are kind of growing up in this magisterial Jewish world. They have more access than ever. It's easier than ever to be Jewish. And I think they're confronting the same question that you started with, which is like, so what now? Like, what are we supposed to do? Where should we move towards now that we got this? So what you see is in some communities, in the modern Orthodox community, you see people who are moving more towards the yeshiva world, less the Hasidic world, which is a very closed community. It's very hard to integrate into the Satmar community or into Ger or any other skver. But essentially, the modern Orthodox community, their kids are waking up and saying, I don't want to just go around the merry-go-round another round. We did it once. Where are my kids going to go? So what you find is that the children of our generation are trying to make their Jewish experience their own, put their own stamp on it. And what I have found is essentially the two most popular pathways to kind of make Judaism their own is you see a lot of people who choose, they're 20 years old now and they choose to move to a more yeshiva oriented community. They don't want to live in, I don't want to start naming, Teaneck or Englewood or the Five Towns or even Boca. They want to go to a more serious yeshiva community, or they want to transform the community of their childhood into something that offers even more robust, even more transcendent experiences. They want to just fly off their chair. And you see this a lot, communal events. If you look at a communal calendar, what brings people out, what gets people, you see there's more celebrations of Yartzites, which is the anniversary of someone's death, of famous rabbis that gets people out. I didn't grow up seeing a lot of that. I didn't grow up seeing much done on Tu B'Shvat. I think a lot of places now, the most exciting day, which is a day that is celebration of agriculture. I don't want to go into history, but what gets people, a Tu B'Shvat Tish. They want to go out. They want to feel something.
Let's just define it. It's the New Year's for the trees.
New Year's for the trees. Very good. Exactly. That they're kind of looking for some transcendence. I think part of the draw of religion is not its familiarity, but how it brings you to some place that's unfamiliar, that feels like transcendent, that feels otherworldly. The term that the philosopher Rudolf Otto used to use is numinous, which is a word I think he basically made up, but it just feels otherworldly. There's an authenticity to it, but it's right here, on American soil that people seek out. The other thing that you are seeing a tremendous amount of, if people don't want to go back on the merry-go-round of a communal American Jewish life, is they're moving to Israel. And I do think that we are seeing a surge from within the Orthodox community, which the modern Orthodox world does. They were always Zionists on American soil. We would dance in the Israeli Day Parade or whatever it was. Doesn't have a phenomenal track record of mass aliyah. I think we are finally beginning to see a mass aliyah coming from the modern Orthodox community that we did not see in previous years. A lot of rabbis are announcing, I'm leaving my community, I'm building in Israel. And a lot of younger kids now, they're 20 years old. They spent the last 2 years studying on a gap year program, which is very popular in the Orthodox world. After 4 years of high school, instead of immediately entering college, they'll take 1 year, even 2 years off to become very calm, take 2 years off, and they'll study in Israel, men and women, yeshivas and seminaries. And what I think you're seeing a lot of people wonder and grapple with is, look, I went to this high school. I had a great experience in high school. The high schools have all changed since the 90s. They're very experiential. They all have color war. They have dancing. They're about identity formation. They got the memo. They're not going to the schools that our parents' generation or even we went to. We were probably we're more or less from the same generation. Schools were just starting to get the memo. I didn't grow up with color war, but I grew up with like what we call ruach, school spirit, literally school spirit. People who went to yeshivas in the 1960s and the 1950s, I mean, they have horror stories. I mean, a lot of their teachers were Holocaust survivors. They were broken people. They weren't out there to make you feel good. They were there to teach. They were there to teach you the basics, give you maybe a little bit of a little patch on the cheek if you weren't getting it right. But they were trying to get you to make sure that you have the material. Schools have become so good at what they do. They are so good at identity formation, particularly in the American modern Orthodox world. I think they are outstanding, borderline, not even border. They're miracles. They're miracles that we have schools that a 15-year-old on American soil wants to be Jewish. I want to do this. It's not because I'm forced. It's not because my parents are making me. This is what gives me a grounding in the world. I think it's unbelievable to see schools of 1,000+ people, which we certainly have in New Jersey, and what kids love it there. But it leads to a new set of problems, and that new set of problems is kids are wondering, okay, so I went to this elementary school and high school. My parents did. For these kids growing up, sometimes even their grandparents did. What's our job in this? What are we going to do to change this? We're just going to maintain the store, make sure it opens up at 9 and closes at 5. I mean, manning the shop is a holy work in and of itself. It's not such exciting work. I think a lot of people are being drawn to Israel because the communal building in Israel, the schools, the schooling system in Israel, even the flavor and personality of religious life in Israel is still emerging before our eyes. And it's kind of my hope that like we may be, and a part of me hopes that's the case, the last mass generation on American soil of Jews. I mean, I think there will be Jews on American soil for many, many years to come, but I think it's going to be more and more attractive as people are growing up that they're going to want to build lives in Israel just for the very fact that it gives them new opportunities that you're not going to have on American soil, where kind of the institutional life and rhythm has already been determined.
Interesting. This is your hope while you live in what, New Jersey?
As I'm sitting in New Jersey, there's a story. Can I share you a story from the Baal Shem Tov?
Always a story, yeah.
That I really like. I want to share it with you because I know you have a lot of listeners from within the community, and I'm trying to source this story. I know without a doubt that I read it, and I actually forgot. I'm a very meticulous note taker, even when I'm reading books for pleasure, and I forgot to write down where I saw this story. But there's a story about the Baal Shem Tov that I think really captures this theme that we're talking about, where somebody went to the Baal Shem Tov, who is the founding personality of the Hasidic movement, and was asking for what we call a segula, a merit. What is something I can do that is going to take me out of this problem that I'm struggling with? And the Baal Shem Tov gave them very detailed instructions to sew a certain garment. I think it was a blanket, and on the blanket to sew a certain name of God and to do it. And if you do this and you sleep with that blanket, all of your problems are going to disappear. And the person, followed every line of the rule and everything and did everything to a T. And you know what? They were saved, and it was unbelievable. A second person came and was struggling with the same thing and heard this story, and also made the same blanket with the same materials and the same instructions, and did not get redeemed. And he was very frustrated. He said, how come it didn't work for me? And he went to the Baal Shem. How come this didn't work for me? How come this didn't take me out of the dire straits? And the Baal Shem Tov said something I think that's very profound. Baal Shem Tov said, it's because you knew from the beginning that it was a segula. You knew it was going to work. When you assumed it was going to work from the very beginning, when you knew the pathway, would take you to the very end from the start, that was the impediment of it actually achieving success. And I think our previous generations were sewing a blanket with the hopes. They were sewing a communal blanket of sorts with the hope that this is going to work. This is going to kind of be and protect our next generation. And the next generation comes up and they already know the secret of the blanket. They already know about the importance of Jewish education and community and kind of all the rules that yield to positive religious outcomes and negative religious outcomes. And we've already been through articles and cycles of teens in crisis, adults in crisis. I mean, shidduch crisis. I mean, we've been through 1,001 crises that we're almost left wondering, like, how come our blanket is not working? We should feel the most secure, the most confident, the most confidently Jewish generation in all of Jewish history. And yet we're not. We're looking over our shoulder. We're wondering, are we doing the right thing? I think the issue that we're grappling with is that from the moment we started with our blanket, we already knew it was a skula. We knew the outcome of our story at the very beginning, which is part of why I think religious expectations in our generation, and even more so in the next generation, hit differently. You know, either of our parents, who I suspect, I don't know if you're comfortable saying what year your parents were born.
My parents are going to be 70.
Okay, so my parents are a little bit older. So my parents were born in the late 1940s. You know, you'd ask somebody on American soil, regardless of their affiliation, where do you think your life is going to take you? What do you think is going to happen next? They had no clue. They're living in the shadow of the Holocaust and the establishment of the state of Israel, some of the most cataclysmic, transformative events in all of Jewish history. How do you know where you're going to end up? You know, the Hasidic communities and the Orthodox communities as we see them today did not exist in the scale back then. They were just beginning to emerge. So everybody started sewing with good intentions and made a blanket in the hope that this would protect them. I think the difficulty that we're dealing with now in 2026 is that the end of our story is already presupposed at the beginning. And what people are trying to find and discover is, where is there room for us to blaze a new path? Where is there room for us to discover and make the timelessness of Yiddishkeit feel personalized for me, and not that I'm riding the merry-go-round or the hamster wheel, the same one as my parents and my grandparents? How do I make this my own? And part of the difficulty is we've done such a good job building communal and institutional life. This was not a question people asked 500 years ago, because we've never lived in a generation never in all of Jewish history, never have we had a generation that was raised or had the ability to be raised from nursery to adulthood in Jewish institutions. We've never had that. Never in all Jewish nurseries, kindergartens, elementary schools, Jewish camps, Jewish high schools, seminaries and yeshivas, gap years in Israel, Jewish colleges we have. Never in all of Jewish history have we been so institutionally mediated. So I think what people are trying to grapple with now is, based on the success of what we achieved, there's a reason why we had to build so many institutions on American soil, because the tides of assimilation have never been this strong. We've never grappled with the struggle, not of persecution, but freedom of religion. That's a very new struggle for the Jewish people. We're very used to being persecuted. We got a lot of history on that. What we're still learning is how to make the case for Judaism when religion is your choice. And that means we became very institutionally mediated. And as a reaction to that, what I'm seeing in this moment are people trying to figure out how, in this institutionally mediated world, can we still feel very personally at home in our own Jewish life and our own Jewish skin.
Very interesting. I have a lot of thoughts. First of all, the expression from shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations comes to mind. Have you heard it?
I have. Just repeat it again, because I haven't heard it in a while.
Yeah, it's like, shirt sleeve is when you work in a factory and you work really difficult manual labor. And the expression is that you go from shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations, because the first generation they, let's say, come as immigrants and work really hard. The second
Mm-hmm.
generation is already comfortable. They take for granted what they have, and they squander it to the point that the third generation is back on the merry-go-round to shirt sleeves. So it just takes three generations to lose what you had built. And I
Exactly.
and I think what I am hearing you speak to, a lot of what you're talking about is not necessarily what I think about, and so it's very interesting to hear your reflections, especially about the institutional mediation of Judaism. And it is mind blowing what we have built in terms of these Jewish scaffolding for Jewish life, where it's almost like once it's there, your Jewish life is like all automated.
It's
It's
like a
just
moving
happening.
sidewalk. That's what it feels like in a lot of ways. And people grapple. Those moving in an airport. There's the moving sidewalk. You just step on, and it'll take you to your gate, or past the corridor. And in many ways, it's a reaction to this very new issue that the Jewish people have never faced before until on really American soil. It started a little bit with the Enlightenment, but like America was founded on freedom of religion, and they're really pretty good at it. We've messed up here and there, and now we've seen a resurgence in anti-Semitism, but at the end of the day, we do have freedom of religion in America. That has not been taken away, and it's not going to be taken away. But that really did pose a very new set of questions for the Jewish people that we responded to by leaning into institutionally mediated Judaism. Send your kids to school. There were a lot of economic drivers in all of this. But what happened was, we are the first generation, meaning you and I, Frida and Dovid, we're the third generation who grew up with the institutional scaffolding already in place. So I think
Yeah.
our generation kind of enjoyed it, but I think the next generation is genuinely kind of trying to figure out, where do I go in all this? What are we going to be
Yeah.
building? Or are we just maintaining this, turning on the lights in the morning and closing them at night? A generation wants a loftier mission, I think.
So very interesting to hear about where you see the Jewish community. I think I often think that when people are not finding enough of a loftier mission, as you say, they look for a spirituality, which I personally don't really speak that language. And I feel like we as Jews have a very often intellectual kind of religiosity. We're looking actually for an intellectual or communal or a goal oriented.
I think that our spirituality, what we like, or what I kind of grew up with, is a very embodied spirituality. I think the
Yes.
spirituality that Americans often seek is a very Eastern model of spirituality, which is almost like a form of escapism. That's not a criticism, but it takes you out of this world. It takes you and gives you kind of this Zen appreciation of just like your own breath and your own life. Sometimes that's very necessary, and I think there's room for that in the Jewish world. But the spirituality of day-to-day Jewish life is actually your responsibilities, a child in a bathtub, even going to work. I mean, it's really embodied spirituality. It's mission-oriented living. My father, who, despite going to Yeshiva University, did end up becoming a doctor, and actually a lot of my father's practice was centered on the Satmar community. So I always felt a kinship. He took care of some of the real legends of Satmar, or Sender Deutsch, who set up Der Yid, and really his entire practice was saved by the Alter Glauber, who was really a legend in the Satmar community, who they manufacture kapatas, G&G. They've since split. But he's the one who saved my father's entire practice, and that's family lore that we always talk about. Despite going to Yeshiva University, my father became an oncologist. And what I grew up with was, before going to work, my father worked in Brooklyn, on East 14th and Kings Highway. That's where his office was. But what we would wake up to was the garage door opening at 4 a.m., because my father would go and learn Torah before he went to work. And we all used to hear there's like that clink of the garage, especially if you're in the bedroom on top of the garage. That was our wake up. We knew daddy's off to work. That to me, like my father, I wouldn't describe him as spiritual in the conventional way. He's not, like jumping on the table and singing in that sense. But there's a spirituality that's almost like baked into his day-to-day routine. I think that's what is lionized and what maybe this generation is struggling to learn how to appreciate and model in their own lives.
I appreciate that. In that vein, since we're coming to the end of our hour, what do you find people who listen to your podcast are looking for? What do they want from you?
What an awesome question. It's one that I've probably thought about. I'm afraid to think about because I'm very.
You're doing great. They love you.
I can be very self-loathing. Like I'm like, what? Why would anybody want to listen to me? I think what I offer is that I have deep understanding and knowledge of multiple, I would say almost the entire spectrum of the Jewish community. I have familial ties, many real familial ties, close familial ties in the non-Orthodox world. Most Bashevkins are not Orthodox. Most Bashevkins did not go to yeshiva. That was my father's like little break-off that he started there. Most global Bashevkins are not Orthodox, let alone, I mean, they're mostly like fully assimilated Americans at this point. But I also live within the modern Orthodox community. I studied in the yeshiva world. I've always had family connections, and I'm deeply connected to the Torah of the Hasidic world. I am fascinated by the Zionist world. I'm not, I'm an okay scholar, and I'm an okay at a lot of different things. I think the value add that I bring is a not just a curiosity, but a deep, I'm enmeshed in multiple Jewish communities, deeply enmeshed in multiple Jewish communities. And it gives me a certain insight where you can hear Jews who assume and treat you as an insider. So they talk in front of you as if you agree, and you hear what different Jewish communities are saying about one another, which is a lot to hold. And you kind of learn to discover what are the third rails that like no Jewish communities are ready to talk to about, and what are the areas where we can find some mutual understanding. What are the areas that require more translation? Something that I often think about is very often, and we began with this, in the Jewish world, and this is another statement, I didn't think that I'd be quoting the Zohar twice in one podcast with Frida Wiesel, but here we are. But there is a statement that's a paraphrase of the Zohar. It was really popularized by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who was an 18th century Kabbalist. I'll say it in Hebrew. I'll translate right after, but I want to give the flavor, and I'm sure you've heard this before. Kudshabrichu Yisrael ve'oraisa chadhu. Which is that God, the Torah, and the Jewish people are all one manifestation of divinity. God, the Torah, and the Jewish people. So I oftentimes ask people, an expert, so to speak, in God is what? A prophet, somebody who talks to God, somebody who prays a lot, somebody who's constantly in dialogue with God. Somebody who is an expert in Torah, the word for that. What would you call them?
A Talmud Chacham.
A Talmud Chacham, exactly. A Torah scholar. We don't really have language or word, or we don't ever even think about it. What is an expert in the Jewish people called? What is that? What is that role? We know the role of a prophet is direct to God. The role of a Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar, is the text of the Torah. But what about someone who's mining divinity, but not directly to God like a prophet, not like a scholar with the Torah, but from the Jewish people? Yeah, of studying the Jewish people. So you might say a Rebbe. I have more to say on this. Maybe it's podcasters. Honestly, I think I think this is something deeply redemptive. I think it is deeply redemptive to allow Jews to talk in a non-hierarchical manner. You're not coming at me like you have all the answers. I'm not coming at you like I have all the answers. But what we're doing is we're learning about each other's lives, and hopefully each of us walk away enriched with a better vision. If you do that over and over again with different Jewish communities, listen to their struggles, to their successes, to their joys, you end up getting closer to that universal vision of what is Yiddishkeit, what is Jewish life all about. So my expert, why do they come to listen to me? I think it's because I am a solid cultural translator of a very wide spectrum of the Jewish world.
I love that. Do you feel like you push the envelope?
That's a great question. It depends where you're seated. The envelope changes depending on where the location of your
I
chair
see the audio.
is.
I see.
I am
see.
never trying to push the envelope for the envelope's sake.
That's great.
There are issues that I bring up that I know in some communities are going to grate on some, and there are other communities that are going to love it. And I have to make a calculated choice. I know what those issues are. They're issues related to sexual orientation. How we relate to gay Jews is a very divisive issue. Anytime we deal with gender distinctions, different gender roles is going to
meaning
be...
the role of women in Judaism. You're not talking about transgenderism. You're talking about
correct.
the role of women in okay.
I would put that, yeah, correct. The question of what is the correct role or gender balance? I don't like calling it women's place in Judaism because I think it's a question that men and women need to grapple with.
I see. Okay, I appreciate
we both need to figure that out. But where do we draw that line in different communities within the Orthodox world, outside the Orthodox world, in the secular world? We're all grappling with where's the right way to place this? How do we do this that we don't infringe? And then lastly, I think people have different styles in how they appreciate Yiddishkeit, Judaism, Jewish thought, Jewish commitment being justified. It's almost what I would say the ultimate divider is always going to be the language that we use. I try to speak, not my intonation, but there's something called like the broadcaster's tone, the broadcaster's dialect, where you basically speak without any accent. I'm speaking with my Long Island accent. You have a lovely Kiryas Joel accent, even though it doesn't come out as much as I'm sure it once was, but we each have our accents, and broadcasters try to speak with an evenness that everyone can hear. I don't do that with my dialect, but I do try to do that with my language. And that is probably the hardest part about speaking to multiple audiences at the same time. It's much easier to speak to one audience because then you know how to code switch for them, and you know how to make them feel comfortable and at home. At the same time, I don't want to feel totally stripped of any cultural insiderness whatsoever. It feels very flat and very dry. People want some of that insiderness. They want to hear the way that you pronounce Hebrew or the way that you talk about some of these things. So I think the ultimate divider is the language that people appreciate Judaism being discussed with. And that's where I think I've made the most progress. And it's really a testament, honestly. It's one of the advantages. I want to say this specifically to you and your audience. What I think is a very interesting distinction between the Hasidic and particularly the Satmar community and the modern Orthodox community that I have seen specifically through podcasting. The difference is that I've noticed the Satmar community knows that their vision of Jewish life is not for everybody. It's for Satmar Jews. It's for Satmar Jews. So when I do something that maybe would be totally unacceptable in Kiryas Joel, I'm not getting hate mail from Satmar Hasidim. In fact, and we have Satmar listeners, I'm getting, that was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. There's a sense of confidence that Satmar Hasidim have in their own life because the burden of appealing to all of world Jewry is taken off of them. That's not what we're trying to do. I find that I get most of the tension from the modern Orthodox world because I think in the modern Orthodox world, we still harbor the hope and the wish which may or may not be true, and I think reasonable people can disagree about this, but there is a sense in the modern Orthodox world that don't we have the vision that could ultimately unify and be the common Judaism for world Jewry? We're balancing, we're in the outside world, we're making a living, we're going to college, but we have a Jewish education. So when you do something that is maybe not normative within the modern Orthodox world, I find very often there is even more defensiveness because you are challenging their underlying assumption that I'm not sure if your model either can reach beyond the community. And I think there's a sense that, certain communities want to hold on to that original vision, that our blanket, so to speak, is strong enough to cover the entirety of the Jewish world. Satmar knows that's not going to happen, and they would even smile. Let them do their thing. We're not competing with anybody. And I think when you're trying to articulate a vision of Judaism that reaches beyond any one community, any one geographic location, or any one iteration of a cultural manifestation, Orthodox Judaism is one iteration. There have been many iterations. That it's not the language of Torah does not talk about Orthodox Judaism. But I think specifically in the modern Orthodox world, there is this hope and sense that we have the final vision that could reach the whole world. And that's why I think I do get a little bit more discomfort or sometimes tension specifically from the community where I find myself in.
Wow, that it's very interesting, and it makes a lot of sense to me also at the same time, because sometimes I watch that interesting guy who does a Matzah Shabbos show. What's his name? It escaped my mind. He has this radio. Yeah, Zev Brenner.
Yeah, Zev Brenner. Yeah. Zev Brenner. He's called me a million times to come on. I like him a lot. He's pushing the envelope. He's really doing the feisty stuff.
He seems to get more pushback not from the Hasidish people. It's like, it's like they're not actually such a critical audience. Much to my pleasant surprise, they've also been pretty good to me as well, which I'm very grateful, because the Jewish community, they're a tough crowd.
It's a tough crowd. It's a
tough crowd.
It's a tough crowd, but I love them. I love the toughness.
Me too.
The criticism, the pushback, being forced to re-articulate what you thought you believed, and somebody says, "How can you believe that?" And then you really have to sit back and say, well, what do I believe? And the fact that I have an audience that's engaged, the fact that I get to be in touch with people like yourself is such an absolute privilege. It comes at a cost. It can be exhausting. I think we're exposed to a wide enough spectrum of the Jewish world that we have moments of fatigue or even outright, we can, God forbid, lose faith in the Jewish people. But one thing that I think unites you and I is that faith and that joy and that curiosity of the broader Jewish world, it's phenomenal. It's so joyful and it's so holy. And I look at both of us as kind of different, the language, different shtenders. A shtender is a lectern where people typically study in a Beit Midrash, but you and I have different lectors in the same Beis Medrash for the study of the Jewish people.
Oh, I love that. That's very, very beautiful. I'm gonna leave you to the last word, because that was very, very lovely. I so enjoyed learning from you. We'll have to do this again and continue some other time. I guess I'm gonna link to all of your stuff in the video description.
Thank you. That means so much to me.
Yeah. Usually I ask at the end what we should link, but I'm just gonna link to the podcast and all your other things.
And link to our YouTube channel, because you're doing. You cracked the YouTube algorithm. We're struggling.
Oh yeah.
You popped out because you do these unbelievable reels that really show you what life is like in Williamsburg. It is why I continue to describe you are doing holy works. Use whatever words you want. but I genuinely I look
it's
up
funny
to you.
because before we started, that was funny. I told you that it's not what I'm looking for, and you said I don't remember how you said it. You made me laugh.
I said that's exactly why it's so holy. It's because you're not looking to do holiness. Because you started sewing the blanket without knowing the outcome. That's really what it is.
Exactly. I feel like Jewish people seem to have a tendency. I've come across people multiple times of accusing you to do good things when you're not trying to do them, which is an interesting thing. Anyway, thank you so much for your time, and also thank you to all the viewers on YouTube. Please check out Dovid's YouTube channel and also the podcast listeners as well. And bye-bye.